Welcome to the Texas News Podcast, where we dive into all things Texas and the future of independence in the great state of Texas. On today's episode, we're talking to Stewart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers and one of the most high-profile figures tied to the January 6 prosecutions. From prison to presidential commutation, Stewart's story is as controversial as it is compelling, and he's got a lot to say about federal overreach, unlawful orders, and why Texans must be prepared to go it alone. So don't go anywhere. Well, friends, today's episode is one of the most important and potentially controversial that we've done to date. As I said, I'm joined by Stewart Rhodes, who is known as the founder of the Oath Keepers. He's a man who's been at the center of one of the most defining political and legal battles in recent American history. He's a Yale-educated attorney, an Army veteran, and a fierce defender of the Constitution. And he was convicted for his role in the January 6th incident. He served time in federal prison and just this year had his sentence commuted by President Trump. But today, it's not just going to be about January 6th and Stewart Rhodes. It's going to be a conversation about the growing divide between the American people and the federal government that has, in many ways, abandoned the rule of law and the very principles that it was founded on. Stewart believes, and many of us agree, that what has happened is part of a broader trend, a government that punishes dissent and opposition and turns its institutions into weapons against citizens who dare to speak out. We'll also talk about why he founded the Oath Keepers, his experience inside the justice system, and what he sees as the existential threat facing constitutional republics, especially here in Texas. We'll also dig into his recent statements, calling out high-profile conservatives for promoting the very agents who, in his words, persecuted January 6 defendants. This episode is going to challenge you. It's going to provoke thought, and if you're like me, it's going to reinforce why the people of Texas must be prepared to go it alone. And so without further ado, let me introduce you to Stewart Rhodes. Thank you so much for joining us on the Texas News Podcast. I am very excited about today, no doubt about it. You and I have crossed paths in the past. We never got to really know each other really well, but we did cross paths through a mutual friend of ours, a friend of Texas News and me and the TNM, Dave Roberts. As a matter of fact, we got an interview coming up with his son Travis in the coming weeks, and I'm looking forward to getting that out there. But Stewart, what can you do me a favor? Can you walk us through your background, your military legal experience, and then we'll talk about Oath Keepers.
Sure, you bet. So in a nutshell, my family all across our history has served both sides. World War II. My dad was a Marine in the 60s. He did not go to Vietnam. He got out just before his unit was deployed to Vietnam in 65. So, but my family history and legacy is to serve in the military. So I signed up at age 18 to serve in the Army as a paratrooper, and that's what I did until I was disabled in a pretty bad parachuting accident, doing rough terrain parachuting. That's where, just like the smoke jumper firefighters do, where you jump into the trees on purpose and with the big Kevlar suit on and a crash helmet, and then you rappel down, which works great in daylight, but then our CO decided to do it at night. And at night, you can't see what you're doing. And so instead of landing on top of the tree like that with your chute, I landed on the side of the tree along with several other guys with the same problem. They couldn't see what they were doing. And so long story short, I fell out while I was trying to rappel down. I felt the tree, the chute tore loose, and I fell about 75 feet and got a compression fracture in my spine. So I've got a fused spine and 2 steel rods in there holding it all together. So that was the end of my military career. But after that, I served as a volunteer firefighter, also a concealed carry instructor in Nevada, and a security firearms instructor. And then I went to college, VA Voc Rehab paid for that, and did really well, got straight A's. And then I worked for Texas Congressman Ron Paul in D.C. for a year. Then after that, I I went to law school, and I attended Yale Law School, and did well there. And at Yale Law School, wrote a paper about the unconstitutional actions of the Bush administration. You know, their assignment of label enemy combatant on American citizens, and their gross violation of due process. And so back then in Yale, because it was a Republican president, they all loved me because I was criticizing a Republican. So they designated me a Yale research scholar. At the same time, I was clerking for the Arizona Supreme Court. Then after that, I served as a small town defense attorney in Montana, criminal defense attorney in Montana. And then I just lost my faith in the legal system along with the political system. And just it's broken, it's corrupt from top to bottom. The legal system is every bit as corrupt. Well, no surprise, right? The same people, bunch of friggin' lawyers. So I'm currently a recovering lawyer, like being a recovering alcoholic. But I really believe 99% of lawyers out there, the old joke about what do you call 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean? A good start. 99% of the lawyers out there are just absolutely pieces of junk who have no concern, respect for their clients, no concern for the Constitution, only care about their own bottom line, their own pocketbook, and their own power and prestige. And along with that, they're what they would call risk averse, as one of my professors at Yale Law School said it. He said, the other students here are very smart, but you have two things. This is a compliment he gave me. This was Guido Calabresi. He said, you have creativity and courage. So the two things most students here just don't have. And that's the problem with our legal profession, is it self-selects for people that really only there to have a secure, safe job, and they lack any integrity and courage. And most of my classmates, they're radical leftists, and some of them proud communists, railing about, a need for a revolution and all this kind of stuff, and the working man's plight. But then when they graduated, they all go work for big, huge corporate defense firms in New York and DC, defending huge insurance companies and big corporations. So they just completely sell their souls for a secure job. So anyway, that's the backdrop of why I started Oath Keepers. I lost faith in our system, and I decided I wanted to at least throw a monkey wrench. I worked on the Ron Paul campaign in 2008, and they stole the nomination from him. The GOP has been rotten to the core for decades, and they stopped him from. He was going to win. He would have won the nomination. He'd have beaten John McCain hands down, but they stole it from him. If you want to go into that, we can. I can tell you all about how they did it in Nevada. But long story short, I realized that both parties, just like Pat Buchanan said, it's two wings of the same bird of prey. So I wanted to at least have cause strategic doubt in the minds of the bad guys, and that's why I started the Oath Keepers. I wanted to encourage all current serving and all military veterans and police, and military police, firefighters, EMS, search and rescue. One of them all be thinking about the orders they're being given, and they're making a decision, which they have an obligation to do, independent decision about whether the orders are lawful or not. And if they're not lawful, and the Constitution, supreme law of the land, they have a duty to refuse to follow them. So that's what the point of the organization was. And a big wake-up call across the country for a lot of people was Hurricane Katrina, where you saw police officers brought from all over the country to help, following unconstitutional orders by the radical anti-gun mayor and police chief, who decided that they're going to confiscate all the weapons after the hurricane and disarm people who were trying to protect themselves from looters. And you had cops from all over the country who obeyed those unconstitutional and unlawful orders. So that was the whole point of Oath Keepers, to try to push back against that tendency,
Well, one of the things we were talking, but before we got started today, we were talking about the Michael New situation back in the 1990s, where his unit in the Army got sent out on a UN deployment, and he refused to switch out his insignia for UN insignia like they required because it was not part of Army regs. And he took a stand, and he was wickedly punished for it. I think dishonorably discharged. That's a whole other story.
Right.
But for anyone out there, and we'll tuck into Oath Keepers a good bit, so people can really understand what Oath Keepers is. You give it a good overview, but I want people to really understand that what you're saying, Stewart, is not beyond the realm. I mean, we have we can see it in our own legislature here. People go, they take office, they raise their right hand, they take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And then, what do? Is they use it like so much toilet paper. That oath goes right in and out of their ears because, let's face it, most of them have not read it. And those that have read it, most of them don't understand it. And so,
But even the ones, I would even give them a pass on that. Why are they there in the first place? Usually it's ego and to cultivate their own grift. Same in your legislature in the Texas House. It's the same as in Congress. They go in there and they come out millionaires. How's that happen? It's a grift.
Well, definitely. I mean, here in Texas, where state rep makes $7,200 a year because we're allegedly a part-time legislature, these guys will spend upwards of seven figures to get elected for a $7,200 a year position, right? But I do want people out there that, look, this is a serious issue. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if your frontline people that are not, that are your first responders, your police officers, your county sheriffs, you talked about the corruption that you saw in the judicial system. It's important for us to find the good guys, the oath keepers, and to reinforce them and not let them be atomized or isolated. So let's get into that. Let's talk about oath keepers. So, what was the original mission when you founded Oath Keepers?
Well, to reach out, we call it reach, teach, and inspire, reach out to all of those who have sworn the same oath we did, the current serving in particular, to educate them more, to teach them about the Constitution they swore to defend and where the lines are. What's a constitutional order and what's an unconstitutional order? So they can't plead ignorance. And then the last part was to inspire them to do the right thing, to do what Michael New did, to do what Warrant Officer Thompson did in the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, where he did not go along with unlawful orders and in fact put a stop to it. And he landed his choppers and told his gunners, his 60 gunners, if they continue to fire on women, children, or on me, he said, you light them up. And he got out of his chopper with his fucking, pardon my language, with his 45 in his hand, and he went and escorted the survivors to the choppers. So that's the example I was taught when I was a paratrooper about lawful and unlawful orders. They used the My Lai massacre in Vietnam as the example for a teaching tool. And Lieutenant Colley, who had followed those orders, defended himself by saying, "Well, I was just following orders," but that's not a valid defense. And so he was found guilty. He was later pardoned by Nixon. That's not the point. Point is that we all knew in the military that we were on the hook and obligated to refuse unlawful orders. Period.
Yeah.
We were also on the hook that if you refuse to follow lawful orders, you could also be court-martialed and put in Leavenworth. So you're on the hook either way. So you better know what you're doing. You better know what the rules are and where the lines are, and then you better have the courage to do the right thing. And that's not an option. The founders put that oath in the Constitution. Same thing goes for domestic use too. That's why I bring this around. Domestically, unfortunately, our police officers in this country and National Guards are not taught the Constitution. They're not taught bedrock principles that will help guide them during times of duress, like during Hurricane Katrina, where they're given orders to go house to house and take all the guns. In their heads, there's crept into American culture this idea that the Constitution is for safe times and normal times, that when things are bad and there's an emergency, you can just throw the Constitution out the window. Like we can declare martial law. Martial law is nowhere in the Constitution. You will never find that term anywhere in the Constitution. It does not exist. So it's completely an invalid concept. Martial law is what you impose on occupied enemy nations, what we imposed on conquered Japan or conquered Nazi Germany. So there's nothing like that in our Constitution to be used domestically. But people still think that because they watch all these friggin' movies out there, they declared martial law. I even got an argument with Bill O'Reilly. One time I was on Bill O'Reilly's show, now first and last time. He said, "Oh, so I said, hey, it's an example of an unlawful order." Because he was like, "What would ever, when would these ever happen? A declaration of 10 orders." I said, "Well, Hurricane Katrina is the most recent example right here in the United States." And he said, well, that was an emergency. The governor declared a state of emergency, and that's what that was. I said, I don't care. I said, bad weather does not cancel the Second Amendment. So it doesn't make a difference what they call it. It's still not lawful. And a court, after the fact, ruled that it was an unlawful order, but you had police obeying it on the ground. It didn't help the people on the ground who were disarmed that later, after the fact, some court said it was wrong. This is the problem in our culture. One more thing back to the lawyers. So you have lawyers in dresses, those are the judges, who have, by hook and by crook, assumed to themselves the sole authority to say what the Constitution is, what it means, and when it's been violated. The founder design was not that at all. You go back to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions by Jefferson and Madison in reaction to the Alien and Sedition Acts, where you had the Adams administration arresting newspaper editors because they were criticizing President Adams. It's like a gross violation of the First Amendment right out of the gate by one of the top founding fathers, by John Adams. So Jefferson and Madison didn't say, well, we have to wait and see what the courts say. No, they said, no, the state legislatures have a duty and obligation to stand up to declare what's been done a nullity, that it's null and void from inception, and to interpose themselves against it and protect the citizens of their state. That's the original design. Everybody has an obligation to decide whether or not what's being done is constitutional, and then taking a stand. That's why they all take an oath. Otherwise, why would anyone why would anyone take an oath to the Constitution? The Supreme Court justices would just say, we swear to do what we think is right, whatever we think is best, because we can just say whatever the Constitution is. And everybody else would say, I swear to follow whatever the court says. That's how the founders designed it.
No, but that's been the practical effect. I mean, and that and I think it's understandable. Why an organization was needed to remind these people about their oaths. I got asked, I guess it was back in golly, was it back in 2010, 2011, 2009, somewhere in that ballpark? Zogby did a poll asking active duty service personnel and their families if they believe that states had a constitutional right to withdraw from the Union. And it was right at 45% believed that they did,
Okay, that's good.
And it was. Look, the polling on this thing is very good and has been for years. But what always struck me about that was, out of that 45%, if they were, to go back to the previous administration, if they were to get an order from President Puddin' Pop that said, go bomb Walmart in Houston because the voters of Texas voted to be their own nation, how many of them would flat out say, no, we're not going to do it? And that's always been, I think, a lot of the question on people's minds about that issue.
Yeah, going back to the design of the founders, they did not trust standing armies for that very reason. They did not trust professional military men, career officers, career NCOs who were, certain service for life. They thought that was a dangerous place because they'd seen what would have been done to them with a standing army. And they knew human nature. If a man's entire identity is wrapped around being a professional officer, military officer, and his pension and everything's tied to it, his ability to provide for his family, he's more likely to go along with bad stuff, right? Well, the same is true for police. What is the police in this country except another version of a standing army? They're professional guys with guns who are reliant on their job for their prestige, their identity as a cop, for their mortgage, for their car payment, and for their pension and retirement. So they're more likely to go along. The founders instead wanted to rely on we the people as the militia. Look at Article 1, Section 8. When it talks about Congress has the authority to provide for calling forth the militia, there are three purposes. 1, to repel invasions. 2, to suppress insurrections. 3, to execute the laws of the Union. That tells me that the original founders' design was it would be we the people as the militia called up by the president who would go out there and execute the laws of the Union. The rare occasions under original federal jurisdiction where you would have like piracy, for example, or counterfeiting, where you would be sent out or to suppress an insurrection to execute the laws of the Union. So there shouldn't even be an FBI. It shouldn't exist, or or a DHS or an ATF or a DEA or any of those agencies. It should be us, the people, called up by the president if he believes he needs us to go help him execute federal law, the laws of the Union.
Now, look, if the United States, as a political and economic institution, because that's what it is, the United States of America is not a nation; it's a political and economic institution. And if it were in that same sort of box envisioned by the founders and framers, we wouldn't be having conversations about Texas independence, I don't think, because
Right.
effectively all of the states would be operating in a very, very loose confederation where we were in essentially a political and economic union, along with a smattering of a mutual defense compact and other things. We'd be able to just manage our business. But, the federal government has wrapped its tentacles literally into every household. And so they've rendered the states as complicit, the governing powers in the states as complicit. I mean, I refer to the Austin politicians as quislings all the time. And people say, why do you do that? I say, because it fits. I mean, they're collaborators. But look, let's move on, because I know we got a short amount of time. So at this point in the journey, you've seen the dark underbelly. You've made a decision to do something about it. You've been very, very public and vocal. And you mentioned an appearance on O'Reilly. I mean, you've been in media. People knew what Oath Keepers was, and for a lot of these people, low information establishment types, that was just a bridge too far for them, right? So,
It's a major threat to their power.
oh,
They
absolutely.
don't want military and police thinking for themselves about what they're being told to do, whether it's lawful or not, and saying no. They want absolute obedience. Of course, the establishment, both wings of the same bird of prey, as Pat Buchanan called it, right? They
I'm
all
sensing
hated.
another Buchanan brigade guy here, right?
They
It
yeah.
feels like, and what's funny is our previous guest, who was talking about the tariffs, was straight out of the Buchanan Brigade as well. So Pat's getting 2 shout outs, 2 episodes in a row. So,
Yeah,
uh,
he was completely right about that. So yeah, they all hated Oath Keepers. I mean, I read Pat Buchanan's book. He was right about a lot of things, but one thing he, I think, underestimated was the resilience of the American people. The
yeah,
MAGA movement has been resilient. There's now, what is this, 100 million of us that have been red pilled, cannot be brainwashed by the mainstream media any longer, and are increasingly skeptical of anything coming out of the mouths of anyone in Washington, D.C. I think that's a good thing. So I think we're far more resilient than he expected us to be over time.
it's really interesting to go back and look at his predictions. Just kind of how he saw the trajectory. But that being said, let's get up to uh, what you knew we were going to talk about it. And this is what I think everybody wants. They want to know what happened, right? Because we've had, we know some folks that were caught up in the J6 mess. You may know Mark and Jaleese Middleton.
Oh yeah, yeah, good
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah. And so, we know directly a lot of folks that were um, part of that, what is effectively a crackdown on political dissent and weaponization of the judiciary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell your story, but from your
Yeah.
perspective, let's first talk about that day. From your perspective, really, what happened that day, and what do people, I think, looking at it from the outside, what do they get wrong about your role in what happened that day?
Okay, so bottom line on January the 6th, um, we were there, Oath Keepers, to protect two permitted events on Capitol grounds. One for Latinos for Trump, which was started by Bianca Grassi, another Texan here. I'm in Texas, by the way, in case the folks don't know that. I was arrested here in Texas, and I'm back here in Texas. So, but we were there to protect Latinos for Trump event. 1 block north of the Capitol, next to the Senate office buildings. A permitted event in what was called Lower Senate Park. That's Area 7. And the next one was Ali Alexander's Stop the Steal rally right outside the east doors of the Capitol on the grass, in what's known as Area 8. That was scheduled that day to happen to kick off about 1 p.m. when they expected President Trump's ellipse rally to end. And Roger Stone was the keynote speaker. Members of Congress were going to speak that day, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Josh Hawley. That's what was planned. What happened is that people, and this is an important point, is that unlike the propaganda spread by the Mockingbird media, it's not the case that everyone was supposed to be at the ellipse rally and no one was supposed to be going to the Capitol until President Trump told them all to go there. It's complete garbage. They were already pre-planned events around the Capitol, as there had been in November, big rally in November over the election, and December, same pattern. They were permitted events around the Capitol, and people marched from Freedom Plaza up to the Capitol, filled the Capitol grass, filled the space in between the Capitol and the Supreme Court, and then had speakers were in front of the Supreme Court. And then same thing happened in December. Events all around the Capitol, permitted events. The Jericho March, Christians were walking around the Capitol and praying for our country and blowing their shofar horns. We protected them. We protected speakers, VIP guests, events, and also just gave out an open offer of escorts for any Trump supporter in the street who felt threatened by Antifa. And the reason why we had to do that is because Antifa had been raging through the streets across the country using direct force and threat of force, terrorism, to suppress the free speech of Trump supporters. And we had stepped up, and so had the Proud Boys, by the way, across the country to protect Trump supporters all over the country, very successfully. So that's why we were in D.C. again. Now, I want to make this thing very clear. I consider J6 a manipulated event, yet a very valid protest. We were there protesting an obviously illegal and unconstitutional election. They directly violated state law in the name of COVID, didn't cure the violation of state election statutes. That triggered a violation of Article 2, because Article 2 says state legislatures alone have the authority to determine the manner for selecting electors. So it should have happened if they're having a serious pandemic. They should have just convened in special session. They could have done it by Zoom and picked their own dang electors. That's what every state legislature used to do, and they still have the authority to do that if they want to. Or they could have amended their state statutes, on elections. But they didn't do any of that. No, for I know, no state legislature passed emergency legislation or held special sessions about what to do about COVID. They just instead let judges monkey with the laws and violate the laws and do what they want, and they let election officials do it. That triggered a violation of Article 2. What happened is the Supreme Court of the United States, when Ken Paxton of Texas, the Attorney General of Texas, sued Pennsylvania, that means was a lawsuit between states under the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court as the trial court. The Supreme Court should have stepped in like it did in Bush v. Gore in 2000 and said, we're going to enforce state election law. And 20 other states joined the lawsuit. But the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it. Only Alito and Thomas said, hey, we have no discretion not to hear this case. It's under our original jurisdiction. We're the trial court. The rest of the court went along with the lefties. Roberts and Kavanaugh and Barrett went along with the lefties and just ducked their duty. That threw us into a constitutional crisis. So that's why we were there protesting, and that's why President Trump held his rally and was a very legitimate and righteous protest against an obviously illegal and unconstitutional coup. They pulled a coup in 2020. I call it the COVID coup. But to cover their tracks, I believe that J6 was a manipulated event. They made sure people got in. They made sure the crowd was stirred up and enraged from both sides, from actors inside the crowd and also from actors inside the police, in particular DC Metro, who use excessive force. How else do you get normally pro-law enforcement Trump supporters to fight the police? You have the police use excessive force, like hitting women in the head with clubs, shooting and killing Ashley Babbitt, things like that happened that day. So that's what I think it was. And so the big picture is they wanted to deflect attention away from what they had done of their coup. Classic projection. They accused us of what they were actually doing to distract the American people from what they had done. They amplified this protest into an insurrection, which never happened. But They wanted to make it look as bad as possible, and they wanted to stop President Trump from being able to come back into office. They wanted to disqualify him under the 14th Amendment. put him in prison, or at least make him totally unelectable in the eyes of the public. That's the whole point of their false charges against us. Oath Keepers and Proud Boys were the only group, only members of those two groups were charged with seditious conspiracy, because we were the designated boogeymen of J6. The left had hated both groups for decades, or for over a decade. And so they wanted to get us, and this was their way of using us in the eyes of the public as a manufactured conspiracy between us and President Trump, with him cast as the kingpin, Enrique Tarrio, leader of the Proud Boys, myself, leader of the Oath Keepers, cast as his lieutenants, and make us look as bad as possible to amplify into this, the false narrative of an insurrection. That's what that was all about. And shut down the valid challenges that day also, but the pipe bomber threat. That was, I believe that was the real reason why Congress recessed, was frankly because of that pipe bomb threat.
Wow. Well, I got to tell you, there is, it's from my perspective, it really and I agree. I mean, they definitely played this thing up, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, they really, I believe, used the J6 incident as a launch pad for increased federal overreach, increased tyranny. I mean, you go, if you're going to get a Biden administration, you can expect a certain level of kind of Obama 2.0, except for the fact that he was effectively a vegetable and being run by other people.
He was a Chi-Com puppet, as I called him. I think I was right.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's no doubt about it. But it almost seems like, because of what happened, in other words, them, painting this picture about what happened on January 6th, they were able to leverage that to really lean into what is effectively a Marxist or Maoist. I'm not going to say a takeover, because frankly, they've kind of already done that. But really ramping up the speed at which they were trying to implement these policies. It helped them justify additional cancel culture. It helped them. With additional political persecution.
I wouldn't say it helped them. I'll say this: they twisted a protest into, it was like the Reichstag fire.
Yeah,
they made sure people got inside, and that was one of my co-defendants called it a lobster trap. Easy to get into, and once you're in, you're screwed. That's a good analogy. People that didn't realize, all they did is walked in and took selfies. That's why they weren't trying to hide their faces. That's why they were on their own phone, because they didn't believe they were committing any crime. At the most, it was trespass. At the most, and not even that, because they weren't told that they shouldn't go inside. All they know is the doors were open. It's the people's house. So,
you're right.
So you got people who were, one way to look at it, as entrapped. They made sure they got inside. Then they twisted that into something it really wasn't. So yes, they used it as their way, like I said, to deflect attention, but also to try to suppress President Trump coming back into office. And the third point would be, yes, to suppress the MAGA movement. But here's the thing: what man means for evil, God will use for good. President Trump only got stronger, and the MAGA movement only got stronger. It was a wheat from the chaff. Sunshine patriots fled and hid. The winter soldiers stepped up. Now you know who they are.
Yeah.
We had guys that rolled over, guys in my own organization. In fact, it turns out one of my top leaders was a friggin' paid informant, recruited at least as early as August of 2020, being paid $6,000 a month. I was going to call this guy as a witness at my trial, and then the prosecutors had to admit that, well, actually, he works for us. I was like, what? So they had already been infiltrating us, and this has been going on. We just know it. We all know, anyone on the political right, you should just understand that anytime you organize anything, they're going to send snitches in. It's just the way it is. But I just was shocked that it was someone so high up. I'm still to this day, I'm under a gag order by the damn judge that I can't tell you this person's name. But they didn't want the New York Times out of this person. So it's, God took care of that. You can go look it up very easily. Just look up New York Times, Oath Keepers informant, and his name will pop up.
Well, look, and Stewart, this is something that, I've warned people about in our organization and other organizations. We've seen a history and had kind of a front row seat to that sort of thing since really kind of the mid 1990s.
Yeah.
You can guarantee that they're trying every way they possibly can, because this is what they do. I mean, this is how they undermine. It's how they send in agents. They try to incite. I mean, look. There's a whole you and I could have probably an entire episode breaking down COINTELPRO.
Oh
Right? I
yeah.
mean,
This
you
is
know,
this is this is what drives me crazy about listening to. I like Cash Patel. I read his book while I was in prison, ironically, and I did 3 years in prison, over a year in solitary confinement. From the day of my arrest, January 13, 2022, it took him a year to cook up fake confessions against me. But from the day of my arrest here in Texas, I was in solitary. But I would listen on my little AM/FM radio to Dan Bongino's show when I was in the Alexandria jail in solitary confinement. So I like Dan, but listening to them say that they need to restore the FBI to its former glory and its place as the preeminent law enforcement agency in America, I just feel like barfing. It's like from its inception, the FBI has been nothing but a politicized secret police. COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover, the notorious cross-dresser, gay, everyone knew he was gay and a cross-dresser, but he was in power for life because he had dirt on everyone. He had files on all the politicians, all the judges. No one dared to cross him. That was in the days of file cabinets. Imagine what it's like now with the total information awareness of the NSA, CIA, FBI, what they have on all these politicians, all the dirt they have on them. That's how they control them. So it's frustrating to listen to Bongino and Cash Patel say they're going to restore it to its former glory, which never existed, instead of disbanding it. B, that they promoted the lead agent in charge of our persecution, Jensen, I think his name is. They gave him a promotion, and then Cash Patel says in this interview he did, he's like, well, he pushed back against his bosses. He questioned why he's being told to do this, but it can only go so far or you'll lose your job. So, he's actually the kind of guy we want in the FBI. That's what they said. It's like, wait a minute. My oath was not to defend the Constitution unless I might lose my job, in which case I'll just do whatever I'm told. That's not the oath. So what they're telling us by promoting this guy is obviously they're not going to fire any of the agents, 5,000 FBI agents that were sent all over America to harass, intimidate, snare, entrap, and coerce confessions, along with DOJ, American patriots, to persecute us. None of those agents are going to be fired. The rank and file are going to get a pass, and they're only going to blame the bosses. That's not how our oath's supposed to work. And what that means is the deep state is going to have all those 5,000 obedient FBI, I call them FBI, persecutors are still going to be in place when Bongino and Patel leave. They're just temporary. And they all know that. The career bureaucrats, including all those weenie FBI agents, know these guys, like Trump, are only temporary. And when they're gone, their real bosses, the deep state bosses, are coming back.
You hit on the thing that I keep having to explain over and over, more times than I should have to, Stewart, is that, guys, the system, like, everybody right now should be happy that Trump is in and he is effectively taking a wrecking ball to the system. He's disrupting them. They're going nuts. There's firings that are happening. But in the end, that system, the Fed system, is self-perpetuating. It's going to, feds are going to fed, right?
Well, I trust his intent, but what blows my mind is that Cash Patel and Dan Bongino and guys I thought knew better are drinking the Kool-Aid when it comes to giving a pass to all these demonstrated oath-breaking FBI agents. They've demonstrated it's not even up for debate. They followed unconstitutional orders. Then why are they still in office? Why are they still in position? I don't get it. Why should they should be fired? So I don't understand why they're doing this. To me, they are dropping the ball. They had the opportunity to purge all those bad agents out, and they're just not doing it. Why not?
Well, and Stuart, that's part of the frustration that I feel, and that's what I was getting to a moment ago. Is people, what we're seeing is people on one hand very happy to see sort of the damage that's being inflicted to the deep state, to the political establishment. But on the other hand, there is a frustration, the release of the Epstein files, which were effectively, hey guys, come get these branded 3-ring binders, and all these things that they wanted to see happen, like you're discussing here. Why are we not purging out? That you know who the bad actors are. Why are they still there? Why have they not been frog marched out of the building and into the courts? And they're watching the federal courts. I think we've had over 50 federal rulings now, essentially overriding what Trump's executive orders are. The ones that he's done to try to get the government reined back in. You've got an intransigent Congress that's slow walking these policies that are in the EOs and the law, the ones like securing our border and dealing with illegal immigration. And so there is a lot of frustration out there where people are concerned, and I think at some point the administration is going to have to prove somehow in some big way that they're serious about sinking the 8 ball on this.
I got an idea.
Okay.
I wrote several open letters. Part of the evidence they used against me was, of course, my free speech, and that's what I actually went to prison for. But a big part of it was open letters to President Trump that I wrote, urging him to invoke the Insurrection Act, because we just went through an entire summer of insurrection in 2020. All over the country, the left was an open insurrection.
Yes.
Burning down cities, the Chads and the CHOP, claiming territory, taking over police precincts, trying to burn down a federal courthouse in Portland, attacking the White House in late May, driving President Trump down in the bunker. Obvious insurrection. But I also encouraged him to use his absolute power and authority as commander-in-chief to declassify anything in any file held by the NSA, CIA, FBI, DHS, etc. He can just have the U.S. military, use military intelligence who are more trustworthy, kick out all the CIA people out of their buildings, all the FBI agents out of their buildings, and go in and seize all that data and throw all the skeletons out of the closet into the street of all the corruption that they have files on. Just like J. Edgar Hoover had files on everyone, the CIA and FBI this day still also have files on all the politicians, all the judges, etc. Throw it all out there for the American public to see and expose them. That's how you defeat it. That's the easiest way, the most peaceful way to defeat the deep state is exposure. He could still do that right now. He could use Tulsi Gabbard's DNI to help him do it. He can use military intelligence. And right now, frankly, he can just go right around Bongino and Kak Patel if they're not willing to play ball. He can just have the military go in there and seize all the damn data and show it to the American people. Everything. Unless it's actual current operations where American lives are at risk overseas or legitimate allies. But when it comes to any politician and judge, throw it all out there, both Republican and Democrat. Let the chips fall where they may. Let us see all the dirt, all the corruption, all the ones that are pedophiles, all the ones that, whatever they've been done for blackmail or bribery, how they're being controlled. That's the first step is disclosure.
Disclosure, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and a lot of those guys would quote unquote self-deport from the federal government if they thought that was going to happen. So,
okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not seeing a downside here. But look, I want to, I kind of want to talk about, I want to move on and talk about, so you obviously you had your sentence commuted. You talked about that. You did the time, you had your sentence commuted.
So we went to trial. Me and my co-defense refused to take a deal. We were all threatened with life in prison. We were all sent a nasty letter by the prosecution saying this is analogous to treason. And by the way, you have 10 days or whatever it was to cut a deal. And the only deal I could have cut would be to turn on President Trump and say that he told us to go in the building. Complete nonsense. I just refused. So my co-defendants, to their honor, also refused to take a deal. They were told they can go home if they would just sign a false statement that said that I told them to go inside, that I had planned to attack the Capitol. So we all stood strong, and so did the Proud Boys that went to trial. And right now, we're still the ones that were commuted, not pardoned, which I just don't understand. And I'm grateful to President Trump for letting us out of prison, but I feel like someone in his circle has convinced him that somehow this was the right way to go. So I'm a disabled vet. Same goes for Joe Biggs with the Proud Boys, Kenya Harrelson, an Oath Keeper. A bunch of us are veterans that we've lost all our disability payments, any right to do anything with the VA. In fact, I've even lost my right to be buried in a veteran cemetery. The VA sent me a nasty letter letting me know that all my rights have been stripped because I'm basically a traitor now. So point being is that I don't understand why we're commuted, not pardoned. So I just put a pardon application in. Ed Martin's a new pardon attorney. It's looking much better. So I think there's hopefully I believe that that'll eventually be fixed and we'll be pardoned. So, but that's the fight that's going on inside of Trump's inner circle right now. I mean, I believe his heart's in the right place, but I have questions about some of the people around him. So he needs to go, he needs to play hardball. You're not going to fix this problem. You're not going to defeat the deep state without radical surgery. So I believe, like I said, mass disclosure has got to come first. And then we can, at that point, decide, well, then now what do we do with all of these traitors? They're all over the place, top to bottom.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many, one of the accusations that gets leveled against Texan supporters often is that we're advocates for treason, or that we're just outright committing treason. And people really don't understand what that word means. It's very clearly defined in the Constitution. What we're doing is not it, right? But what some of those people are doing in the federal government might definitely qualify. Not
That's right.
not saying anything, but it could. Well, look, I want we've got just a little bit of time left. Like I
Sure.
said, you and I could do this for a long time. I bet we've got
Yeah.
some rabbit holes we could go down, and just there's a lot of things out there that people don't really, we
Correct.
you called the media the Mockingbird media. We could talk about Operation Mockingbird, right? Or we could really deep dive into COINTELPRO. But what I want to do is I want to wrap up as we get ready to do this. Is now you are here in Texas. You got
Again,
the
right.
you got the hat
I'm
to
back.
prove it, right? I mean, you're here, and so
Yeah, I was living in Little Elm when I was arrested, and I'm right back
yeah.
here again. Yeah.
Well, since you've been here, kind of what is your plan moving forward? What are you looking to do?
Well, right now I'm working as a national spokesman for Condemned USA, which was started by another Texan, Trennis Evans. You should have him on your show sometime. Good man, another J6 defendant who took it upon himself to help other J6ers who were still in prison. And he helped me when I was in prison. His staff would come visit me, and they picked me up when I got released. He helped raise money for lawyers, provide lawyers. So he's really done a lot of good work. And we're still pushing for the political prisoners that are still in this country, like Tina Peters out there in Colorado. She blew the whistle on election fraud in 2020, and under the state of Colorado, their CRIP system, they put her in prison for 9 years. And so we just wrote an amicus brief supporting that case being removed to federal court where it belongs, and then dismissed after that. So I'm
Yeah,
working for Condemned USA as a national spokesman, and I definitely encourage folks to support Condemned USA. And I'm just rebuilding my life. That's why I've got to give send go if you don't want me putting it out there. But and folks want to help me rebuild. I mean, I lost everything. I lost my truck, my Harley, my home. I lost everything. My paycheck. I used to work. I was the national president of Oath Keepers, and I drew a salary. I lost all of that. Lost all my veterans benefits. So it's all gone. So we're all rebuilding. All the J6ers are in the same position. We're all rebuilding. So what's going forward? I'm going to advocate for other political prisoners, and also for reform. And even though it's tilting against windmills, reform of our BOP is dirty and rotten and broken, and reform of our justice system, top to bottom, with all the lawyers out there. We can do a whole interview about what lawyers do that's wrong. Both defense attorneys and prosecutors, they're all conspiring to commit perjury when they convince their client to take a plea deal that's not for a false statement, and then make false allegations against other people. They're all complicit in suborning perjury and conspiring to commit perjury. It's
right.
dirty. It's rotten. So just doing what I can to blow the whistle on that, and I'm most likely going to be restoring Oath Keepers in some form. I believe the mission is still important. I mean, look, what did Dan Bongino and Cash Patel just tell us? That they don't understand the oath. That's what
Sure,
they just
right.
told me. So, I got to give them some tough love and say, guys, this is what the oath requires. It requires you to say no, and you are now the bosses. It requires you to fire those who failed to say no. So that's what I'll be doing is back, same mission. My life mission is to support and defend the Constitution. And I've given up, I could, as a Yale law graduate, I could have been a wealthy attorney. I could have gone into conventional politics. I could probably be a U.S. Senator right now if I'd played the establishment game. That's not what my oath said to do. So I took the road less traveled. And I have no choice but to continue on the same path. I just have no choice. I have to speak my mind.
Well, Stewart, that's great to know, and we'll make sure that we get that link so people can we'll get it in the show notes and the description, because look, people need to help out. You know, the Middletons, they're doing the same thing. You know, Kara, my wife, she asked me, you know, when it came time for both of them to go in, they put Mark literally in prison about a mile and a half from my house. Uh, but you know, she asked, well, what happens to all their stuff? And I said, well, if they've got family, maybe the family can take care of it. But if they don't have somebody close, or don't have maybe some, somebody with some money that can pay those things, they're going to lose their house. They're going to lose their vehicles. I mean, they're going to obviously lose their jobs. You know, I mean, this is what happens. And you know, you come out that, you know, the pardon, the commutations, those are great. It's great to be free. But a lot of people don't understand is that you come out and you're essentially starting from scratch, and you still kind of got one hand tied behind your back because of the stigma that a lot of people put on everything connected to J6. So,
Yeah,
well, Stewart, I'll tell you, as we wrap this thing up,
but I don't want people to feel sorry for me. That's not what I'm saying.
no,
I'm just
no,
saying the
and
reality is that we're all rebuilding. But hey, you know, I'm resilient. I mean,
well, look, you gotta support. And look, this is my opportunity to preach to our people, because folks need to understand that when people make sacrifices for the mission, for the greater cause, and they take damage, or they make these sacrifices, for those that did not have to sacrifice, your sacrifice is supporting those who did. And you know, and that's just the bottom line. If everybody, I say this a lot. This will be the first time you've heard this from me, not the first time the rest of the viewers and listeners have. But look, Sam Houston did not win the Battle of San Jacinto with a bunch of cheerleaders, right? I mean, spectators and cheerleaders are great, but you know, on the last live stream, I read a letter that was written right after the Battle of Gonzales, and it was written essentially to the convention, but really an open letter to the people. And it basically said, why, you know, it quoted scripture, and it said, why halt ye between two opinions? If you're going to support Santa Anna and the Mexican Constitution, then go do that. But if you're going to support, you know, our fundamental rights and self-determination, then this is where you need to be. And it really gave two choices. It said, here's the deal. If you're young and gallant, report to the field. But if you're elderly or infirm, give of your substance. Right.
mm-hmm.
And so it is, you know, so I don't want, and Stuart, I don't want to give you the impression that this is, hey, everybody, feel sorry for Stuart. It's not. It's for people that suffered under the persecution of the federal system that we want to be free of. It is incumbent upon us to surround people like Stewart and like the Middletons and like Trennis and other people, because, you know, if we don't take care of us, then who will? You know, that's ultimately it. So, Stewart, I want to thank you. I think we're going to, if you're willing, we will definitely do this again.
Sounds good. Yeah, we had a good chat. We can talk about Texas next time, and what needs to happen in Texas. A lot that we can do in Texas to purge out all the rhinos and all the traitors in our
Oh,
own
and
ranks inside
that
of Texas.
conversation's coming, and I think, look, I think we'll wind up having some conversations, not on the podcast, because I think there's some phenomenal synergies here, and I think we could probably do some pretty amazing things. And so, looking forward to exploring that. But in the meantime, Stuart, we'll get the link to the Gibson Go? But do you have a website that people can go and connect with you?
Well, I'm on Facebook again, finally. I first got out of prison. I started a new Facebook page, but I was immediately suspended. But now Facebook went back on. X, though, suspended me, and I'm not back on X yet. I've appealed it. I don't understand why X is worse than Facebook now. Don't get it. But I have a Rumble account. I haven't used it yet. I need to start using that. And I've got a Substack. I think I gave you all the links to those, but folks can go on Substack and follow me there. And like I said, I'll be relaunching Oath Keepers in some form. I'm gonna try to probably wait a little bit till after my pardon. Hopefully I get a pardon next week or two before I go make waves again with Oath Keepers. So
Right.
I need to lay low a little bit. until then. But yeah, my mission has not changed. When we look at it with all of us J6s, I know they're all feel the same way. We're driving on, and so when we look at it, it's not that you're just supporting us to rehab from our being crushed financially. You're also fueling us to continue on and helping to do what we're doing. Because I know, like my good buddy, Lego Man, Rob. He's a Ranger veteran, good guy. You should have him on your show sometime too. He's actually moving to Texas. He's going to be a Texan. Important point. A lot of the men that died at the Alamo were not from Texas. They were from like New England. They were
Yep.
from all over the United States. They came to Texas for a reason. And same goes for us.
Hey, look, sir, I tell people all the time, we get questions in where people say, hey, look, I'm not from Texas. Can I join your organization? It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Travis, Bowie, Crockett, Houston, none of those people were from Texas. And so if they can give their lives in service of independence, then who are we to set the bar any higher? Right.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
hey, you act like a Texan, you become a Texan. And Texas is, as goes Texas, so goes the United States. I do believe that. This is the epicenter. That's why I'm here. And that's why a lot of people are drawn here, because we understand this is a critical state. It really is. And you've got a legacy like no other state, that you guys were an independent republic,
and we're going to be again.
And it stretched all the way to Montana, from what I know, right? That
Oh,
old
I
map
know. Look,
that I
if
saw.
we had the original map, we would have ski resorts, but alas, that's not to be.
Well, you never know. Maybe you can reclaim your original boundaries. We'll see.
We sold it, and that's part of the problem. And if they wanted to buy, there's been a significant appreciation in value since the compromise of 1850. But
well, I'll tell you what, I believe in a national jubilee. I don't believe we the people owe jack to any of these international bankers or to the communist Chinese or to anybody else. I really believe we need a jubilee. Just wipe the slate clean.
Well, I mean, might as well. I mean, it's basically electrons floating around in the ether anyway at this point.
Right. Exactly.
So,
that's right.
That's why I always think it's funny when people oppose crypto. It's like, you realize that's essentially what your money supply is right now.
That's what the Federal Reserve is. It's a friggin' private banking cartel crypto. It's all it's ever been. Exactly right. Well, hey man, it's been an honor talking to you. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stewart, and looking forward to doing this again.
Sounds good, brother. God bless.
Well, there you go. A big thank you to Stewart Rhodes for joining me today. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. When you stand up to the federal government, you better be ready for what comes next. They will not go quietly. And so we have to be prepared, because Stewart Rhodes is a man who stood up. Right or wrong in the eyes of Washington, he made his decision, he took his stand, and he paid the price. But here's what I hope folks took away from this conversation. When the people who are supposed to protect your rights are the same ones violating them, you've got a problem that goes way deeper than politics. You've got a system that cannot be fixed. You've got a system that needs to be replaced or removed from your everyday lives. Texans, we don't wait around for someone to give us permission to defend our liberty. We never have. And what Stewart's story reminds us is that loyalty to the Constitution and to the principles that initially founded the Union, and definitely the principles that were here that founded the initial Republic of Texas, those principles and loyalty to those principles means nothing if you're not willing to stand behind it when it's hard, when it costs you something. And that's the real message here. If we want to live free, if we want a government that actually protects our rights, then we've got to build it for ourselves. Not in D.C., but right here in Texas. Because no one is coming to save us. It's up to us, just like it's always been. And so I want to thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the Texas News Podcast. I would like to encourage you to join the Texas Nationalist Movement. Head over to tnm.me/join. Your membership helps keep programs like this and information like this circulating out there, and helps us take a stand, a real stand against federal overreach, and gives us a shot at cleaning up the sewer in Austin, Texas. It's going to be just like I said, if we think somebody's coming to save us, they're not. It's going to be up to us, up to me and to you, just like it's always been. And so join us today. If you believe that the best people to govern Texans are Texans, then you need to be a member of the Texas nationalist movement. Okay. And so with that, I will leave you with the words I leave you with every time we're together. They're not my words. They're the words of Sam Houston when he said that Texas will again lift its head and stand among the nations. I believe that time is now. And the question is, will you stand with her?